And hello, everyone. I am
Hello,
Moose.
and I am the Milo. I think
And
I said that wrong.
And this is the show. Whoa, what is this? What is this? What do we have going on here?
We're going to talk.
I'm getting music on mine. Hang on.
Music?
Yeah, I just messed up some of the audio here. Okay, let me see.
Okay.
I think we're back, everyone. All right.
Are we good?
Yes. So this is the show where we talk about what probably nobody wants to hear.
But we hope you listen anyway.
So today's topic, we are going to be talking about the calendar. But I'm going to humor him like you humor a small child. But so it's been a year though since we've done an episode. I was just telling Milo the other night that our last episode we were exchanging stuff on April 1st. And now it's March 30th. So it's been almost a year. My computer got fried, and then our schedules got busy, and then things just kept happening that prevented us from doing another episode. But we're back again, hungry for more abuse. So what have you been up to for the last year?
Oh my gosh, it's mostly, honest to God, mostly just work. I work a retail job, and it's been, busy, very, very busy. Other than that, I've been doing some tutoring. I love education and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and good opportunities in both of those with the current situation in the country. Which, disclaimer, we can guarantee that you will not get the coronavirus from this show.
That is true. Yes, I was super sick just recently, and it was not coronavirus. I was tested, and I'm perfectly healthy.
Good to go. So yeah, I mean, it's basically been the same for me the last year, just super busy with work, but we now have another baby on the way. Our daughter Rosalie was born last March, and less than 4 months later, we conceived again. And yeah, so this baby is due on April 6th. It's going to be here just before Passover, so that's kind of exciting. And that's what's been going on in my life. And as you can see, I'm a little baby face tonight. We're under this quarantine social distancing, and this is what happens when you leave me alone with myself for 2 weeks. I get bored and I cut my hair, apparently. So I look like Andy Bernard, and I don't think anybody's happy about that.
Not especially. I have to say, when we Skyped the other night to get this kind of stuff set up, the Skype conversation started a little bit like this.
Yeah.
And then
I gave him the big reveal.
Yeah. That was actually pretty funny. Yeah, but you know what? Yeah, that's going to grow back for you in what, like 3 weeks?
Yeah, if that.
Yeah, this is 4 years.
Yeah.
4 years.
Looks gorgeous.
It is what it is. I know.
It'd probably grow better if you stopped wearing a dress. I mean, I'm just saying.
I don't think it would. I don't think genetics, maybe. Oh, maybe.
All right.
It's a man skirt.
It's a man skirt.
That's right.
So let's get into this. Let's we're going to hear what. Go ahead.
Yeah, as a side note to the viewers, I am kilted in every episode. You can't tell because you only see this much, but I guarantee you I am wearing a kilt.
I was almost going to go pantsless tonight just because that seems to kind of be the theme with everybody working from home. All you have to do is put on a shirt and make it look like you're dressed. But yeah, I was too lazy to take my pants off.
Oh my, that's a new low. Okay, so yeah, let's go on.
Let's jump into this. So we're going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter. I know that that's been our goal with all these other episodes, but Milo is going to be a strict authoritarian on this, and he wants to kind of run this almost like in a debate forum, and we're each going to get a few minutes to present our side, and then we'll kind of go into a little rebuttal and then close out and see if we can keep this confined within half an hour.
Right. My goal is that there are fewer rabbit trails, and I think we can do that. So
yes.
That being said, are you good to go if I start my?
I am good to go. All you got to let me do is I've got the slides all set up on my side, and let me know when we are needing each one.
Okay. So if you want, let's go ahead and start it on slide number 1. It should why not follow a Torah-only calendar?
All right, so now we've got that up.
Okay, cool. So I'll, as this slide comes up, I'll give you kind of a short synopsis of my calendar thesis, I guess. So since coming into the Torah faith, the Torah walk, the calendar was one of the first topics that I really thoroughly dug in and researched about 12 years ago now. And
so let me pause you for just a second. I've still got the slide
yes.
up. Do you want me to do you want to read the slide and then go back to sharing on this, or do you want? Because I mean, I'd like people to be able to see you as we're going over this.
Yeah, go ahead and put it back on me because I'm going to monologue for just a second.
Okay.
You know, that's what everybody needs to see is a little more Milo.
Oh
So,
yeah, can't get enough.
Okay. So yeah, so that's good. So the calendar is one of the first things that I really dug into when I came into this Torah observant faith about 12 years ago. And the research that I came up with then is the same thing essentially that I believe about it now. And I'm going to throw out this disclaimer. The calendar system that I'm discussing and that I'm going to present tonight, I don't actually keep it myself for one reason, and one reason alone. I keep what my community keeps because I think that, and I think you said this in a forum at some point, I love the heck out of your post because...
Because I'm awesome.
Well, in this case, yes. You have to do what your community is doing because if you're out here keeping the holidays, keeping Shabbat, keeping these things in isolation when other people are around you are doing them differently, you're missing out. You're missing out on a lot. You need to keep the holidays when your community is keeping them. That being said, I think the calendar's wrong, and this is what I believe. So that's my disclaimer.
So let me translate the disclaimer. He's a lily-livered hypocrite.
Well, we'll go with that. We'll.
Oh, and your video froze. Where'd you go?
So
we're back. Okay.
Video. All right, and we're back.
We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
I'm sitting right next to my router, so I'm hoping that this maintains. Okay. So the calendar system that I believe in is called the Zadokite calendar. It's also called the Enoch calendar. Mainly referenced in the Book of Enoch, which is, I'm sure the Moose and I have differing opinions on its canonicity and authenticity. And did Enoch actually write it? And, is it referenced multiple times in the New Testament? Yes, it is. But
like we know Enoch was translated, but was his book?
Well, I tend to think it was. So, so if you want to bring up that first slide, then I'll just go through and start kind of what I'm
all right
going to present here now.
So here the slide is up. Do you want to read it? You want me to read it? How do we want to do this?
I'm going to read through and I'll give some ad libs because as I read through this is I have to say I took my slides from like a 20-page thesis that I'm in the process of writing. I am not going to read all 20 pages, thank God. But I am going to ad lib based on my head knowledge and what's in the slides. So why not follow a Torah-only calendar? From my perspective, the answer is simple. One doesn't exist. The Torah doesn't give us a cohesive calendar system. That's not its purpose. At best, what the Torah gives us is vague and general guidelines that a biblical calendar should follow, and in some cases shouldn't. Hence, it is impossible to derive a satisfactorily true calendar from Torah alone. At its best, using the Torah alone, we can make an educated guess and attempt to fabricate one on our level of understanding and the information at hand. Let's go ahead and progress to slide number 2, in which, let me know when you have that pulled up.
Yep, that is up now.
Okay, so this to me is the beginning of all calendar discussions, is Genesis 1, because this is where God, God begins to, okay.
Yep, you're good.
We're good, we're there.
Yep.
1:14 through 16, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this you're going to share in your 5 to 10 minute portion here.
Yep.
Let there be lights in the dome of the sky, or to separate day from night. So we see here the division of the day. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Super important to zero in on in this passage. So in this passage, I'm not going to finish reading the rest of it, but we're all very familiar with it. God is saying that the sun and the moon, those are the 2 great lights that he's talking about, regulate 4 things. That's the signs, the seasons, the days, and the years. Now, the only way, from a scientific perspective, that you have the sun and the moon dividing these 4 things, specifically the years, what I'm honing in on here, is by measuring the equinox and the solstices. Those are the definitive measure points for how the sun and the moon affect the Earth.
Okay.
And from those 4 points, that's where we get, there's 2 equinoxes, 2 solstices. Those 4 points divide the year into seasons, and that's one of the other things that God created the sun and the moon for. And then, of course, you have
Man,
the greater light rule the day.
go back a sentence. We're having a little bit of difficulty getting your feed.
Oh, sorry. It probably partially because everyone's home right now. Everyone's streaming and everyone's, I've noticed that a little bit. So basically what I'm saying here is the sun and the moon are the 2 great lights that rule the night and the day.
Yep.
And the sun and the moon, from a big picture perspective, are what gives us the year.
Okay, let me pause you for a second. I've still got slide 2 up. You got to let me know when you want me to take it down and when you want to discuss. I want to leave it up if there's more you want to read from it. So just make sure you keep me posted on this.
No, that's okay. Let's just go ahead and I think I've beaten slide 2 to a dead horse. Let's just move on to 3, and then we'll go back to me for a few seconds after that.
All right, so slide 3 is open. Let me know when you want it down.
Slide 3. Okay, so this is one that to me definitively tells me that the Enoch/the Zadokite calendar is the correct one, and I'll explain why here in a minute.
Okay.
How long is a biblical month, and by extension a biblical year? Well, we have 2 pretty clear examples of how long these 2 units of time are. Keep in mind that a month is not one of those 4 factors that the sun and the moon regulate, as per Genesis 1. So a biblical month, there's 2 examples. One is in Genesis 7 in the flood account, where we see the floodwaters began on the 17th day. If you want, you can go back to me here. I've got the slide here, and I'll just kind of do some ad-libbing, and I like to talk with my hands because I feel like it makes more sense.
Do you want to read through each one and then kind of go back and touch each point and give your monologue on it?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So we've got a couple bullet points here. The floodwaters began on the 17th day of the 2nd month. The waters were on the earth for 150 days, and so we see a span of 5 months here, comprising 150 days. A little simple math tells us that this is 5 months of 30 days each.
Right.
Revelation 11 further records that 42 months, 1,260 days, and 3.5 years are synonymous measures of time. And a little bit of simple math here tells us that this is also 30-day months, equaling out to a 360-day year. So, if you want to come back to me here for just a second, I'm going to...
All right, slide is closed.
I'm going to emphasize this point. The Zadokite calendar is the only calendar that reconciles all of this data. This is my sales pitch to the world at large. The Zadokite calendar is not what predominantly anyone in this Torah-based walk keeps, but it's the only calendar that I've come across that reconciles all of this data, where you have 30-day months, you have 360-day years. It's actually 364, but there's a reason for that we can get into here in a little bit.
Yeah.
But basically, the entire calendar is divisible by 7s. Every season is 13 weeks. Every year is 52 weeks. Everything is divisible in absolute perfect counts of 7. If you want to go to the next slide, I have 2 more slides I'm going to go through. And these are just kind of the rules of the Zadokite calendar system. If you want, you can just leave this up here for a second and then maybe go back to me as I'm talking. That's fine.
Slide 4 is up.
Slide 4. So this is part 1 of the rules of how the Zadokite calendar functions. Maybe I should sidetrack for a moment and explain the name Zadokite. I realize I haven't done that yet, so I apologize.
Okay.
So maybe back to me.
Yeah.
As I was explaining to Moose a little bit earlier, today has basically been nonstop for me, and I have not had a chance to rehearse what I'm going to say. So I apologize. This is a little disjointed. But it's 12 years of research. So who were the Zadokites? The Zadokites were the priestly descendants that lived at the Qumran community, from which we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have records of how they kept time, how they observed Passover, how they observed the Feast of Sukkot, when they observed these feasts, and so on and so forth. And there was a few extra things that they did in their community as far as the calendar is concerned. But basically, it's the same as the calendar system outlined in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. We have 3 ancient sources, all pointing to this being definitively how the calendar system should function. So those were the Zadokites. So the priestly line, they're referenced in the book of Ezekiel that the priestly succession would go from Aaron to Zadok. The Zadokites in the 1st century lived at Qumran. They were, according to some theories, they were chased there by the illegitimate priesthood. That's all stuff I'll let you guys research on your own. I don't have a verdict on it. That's just the theory. So, but we do know that they were called the Zadokites, and this is the calendar system they kept. So that's why we call it the calendar, the Zadokite calendar. It's also called the priestly calendar and the Enochian calendar. But anyway, if we want to go back to that 4th slide, I'm going to go through the rules of how this calendar works.
Sure.
And this is just a brief overview. There's a lot more specifics than this, but this is basically how it works, and these are the scripture references for why we do it that way. So the calendar does follow the creation pattern of evening to morning. I think that's something that you and I agree on, that days are tracked from evening to the following evening.
Yep.
And that's Genesis 1, Psalm 55, and Daniel 8. You'll notice some parallels there where both David and Daniel say that they prayed evening, morning, and afternoon. In that order. So I think that's pretty clear. 30 days create one biblical month. We talked about that in Genesis 7 and Revelation 11.
Right.
The year is 12 months, counted as 360 days. In reality, there are 4 additional, what are called intercalary days.
Okay.
Help to keep the year on track with the agricultural year.
Okay.
You with me?
Yep.
Am I with you?
Yep.
Okay. The year begins after the vernal or spring equinox when night and day are equal to one another in duration. And this rule is hard and fast, found in the book of Enoch in chapter 72. It's also referenced there among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then I have Genesis 1, verse 14 as a reference, because that's how I understand the greater lights to rule the day and the night, how they govern years. So if you want to pop over to slide 5, I'll cover the last of the rules of this calendar system, and then wrap it up real quick.
All right.
So the first of the year is always going to begin on a Wednesday. I know it's, there's that joke like back in the day, I think it was a Tuesday. Well, no, anyway. The first day of the year is always going to be on a Wednesday following the vernal equinox, and that's from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the citation there, 4Q. The reason why they do this is because the 4th day of creation is when God created the sun and the moon. Hence the beginning of biblical reckoning of days.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. And so, here's the beautiful part about this. I didn't put this in the slide. I wish I would have. Because the first day of the year is always a Wednesday, you can pan back to me here if you want, because I'm going to get really animated here for a second.
Oh, boy. I'm excited.
Yeah. Because the first day of the year is always a Wednesday, all of your appointed times are going to fall on the same days of the week every year. So I know that Passover 50 years from now, if I was in a community keeping the Zadokite calendar, would always fall on a Wednesday as well, because it starts, it's the 15th, and that's 2 weeks out from the first of the first month. Same with Sukkot. Sukkot always runs Wednesday to Wednesday. The Day of Atonement is always on a Friday. Your appointed times are always, always, always on the same day of the week each year. And that's absolutely fantastic from a planning perspective.
So let me just pause you for 1 second, just for clarification. So for Passover, does the Passover meal start on a Wednesday night? Or does the day of Passover start on a Wednesday night and you eat the meal on a Thursday night? Just so I'm making sure I'm understanding.
No, that's fine. I have to rabbit trail for a second to answer your question, because different groups do their Passover meal differently. Some groups do it at the beginning of the 14th of Abib. Some groups do it at the end of the 14th of Abib. I think you and I both do it at the beginning of the 14th. I think.
No, we would do it at the beginning of the 15th, end of the 14th.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, by this calendar, does the 14th of the month start on a Wednesday night or on a Tuesday night?
The 14th of the month would start on I'm hoping I'm saying this correctly, Tuesday night.
Okay.
No, the 15th would start on a Tuesday night because Wednesday is the actual Sabbath and it starts the day prior, the evening prior.
All right.
So we would be observing our, that answers your question?
Yep.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go back to the slide and finish that off, or are you all done with it?
I'm I'm just super excited that every holiday is on the same day of the week. You don't realize how amazing that is to me because there's no guessing work. It's always like,
So now we can just start a saying, hump day is remove the lump day.
remove the 11 lump day.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to slide 5, and then I'll finish
All right.
my
Slide 5
bit
is
off
up.
here. Okay. So second bullet point here.
Yep.
7th and 10th month are regarded as days of remembrance. That's from the Book of Jubilees. They are days which officially begin the new season of the year as determined by the solar and lunar positions visible as the equinoxes and the solstices. So those days basically are when the seasons change, right?
Okay.
And on the Zodiac calendar, we recognize the changing of seasons.
Right.
And we recognize that certain months are grouped together in certain seasons, right? So like you have your spring months, your summer months, so on and so forth.
Okay.
This is the other absolutely amazing thing to me, and this part is so deep that I don't know how to adequately explain it, but the calendar flows alongside the priestly cycles given in 1 Chronicles 24. So if you want to pan back over to me here, I'll kind of ad-lib on that a little bit.
Okay. And then just to let you know, I think we're getting well into 10 minutes here, so just to keep you aware of the time.
Sorry, I'm just about done. Okay, so the priestly cycles given by King David in 1 Chronicles 24, those are the 24 priestly cycles. And over the Dead Sea Scrolls record elaborately, in exquisite detail, how during the course of a 6-year cycle, and they have every month planned out during those 6 years, how the 24 priestly cycles will have completely rotated through and begun again back at the first priest at the end of the 6 years. So by the 7th year, you will have a complete, like the cycle will have gone through, I don't remember how many times it is, but the cycle will have gone through in a completely even level. Again, there's symmetry, there's poetry, it all makes sense. It all wraps together mathematically into a big, beautiful equation. And you know I love numbers, so that's why I'm so excited. So I think I've adequately butchered my explanation, so I'm going to call this good and hand it over to you.
All right. So I'll jump right into mine. I'm going to open up my first slide, if I can get the buttons to work. All right. So I start out in Deuteronomy 4:2. It says, "You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of Jehovah your God that I command you." So the reason I'm starting out with this is my calendar system, my philosophy, all of my take on God and the scriptures it's almost a dumb way. And what I mean by that is it's simplistic. Everybody can do it. That's where I come at from this. I believe that in the scripture that says we have no need that any man teach us. In other words, we can read the scriptures and everyone has the capacity to understand what God is trying to say, what God is trying to do. We don't need to have any sort of special abilities. And so I bring up this scripture because I believe that the commandments regarding the feasts are commandments. And so everything that is involved with them is part of the commandment from God. So we have to be able to understand how we're to observe them in order to keep the command. And we can't add to it or diminish it. So having said that, I believe that the entirety, contrary to Milo's take here, I do believe that the calendar is adequately and completely revealed within the scriptures. Now, that's not to say that we don't need to know a little bit of history or linguistics to understand what is being conveyed in these, but I don't believe that we need to have any sort of special understanding to know what God expects of us. So I'll jump into slide 2 here. And this is the same scripture that Milo brought up. It says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for appointed times and for days and for years." So as Milo pointed out here, what you see absent is months. You see days, years, and appointed times, and then of course signs, but that's, I think, something separate. I would contend that because the appointed times take place at a specific time of the month, that forces you to say that these lights in the sky have to determine the months, if that makes sense. Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
You can't have Passover on the 14th day of the month if you don't know when the month is. So the month has to be determined by the sun and the moon. And I believe that it is. And so I'll go into, let's see, slide 3. We have this reference in the Torah that tells us the time of the year. It says the flax and the barley were struck down. This is during the plagues on Egypt. The flax and the barley were struck down, for the barley was in ear, or in the Hebrew, Abib or Aviv, and the flax was in bud. So it's giving a description here of the amount that the barley had grown when these plagues were taking place, right at the cusp of the Exodus, at the cusp of Passover. And I don't believe that God gives this description in the scriptures willy-nilly for no purpose. I think that he gave it for a specific purpose so that we would understand the season that this had taken place in, the time of the year that this had taken place in. So it was at the time of the Aviv barley. And then in the next scripture here, it says that Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand Jehovah brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today, in the month of Abib, you are going out." In the month or the moon of Abib. So again, when we get to the concept of there is nothing in the Torah that is given without a specific purpose, we understand that Moses specified you are going out during this month, the month of the Aviv barley, and you are to remember that. This is part of keeping the commandment. We're to know that this is the time in which we do it. Some have pointed out that the constellations and the stars, you have the barley, and that comes up on the horizon at this time of year. And I'm not well studied enough in astronomy to know this, and I don't believe that most people, and I could be wrong, most people were as well familiar with this, but most people were familiar with the grains growing out in the fields all around them. They could go out and they would know when the barley was Aviv. This was something that, again, the simplified, dumb system that anybody can understand. You go outside, and when this is at a certain stage of growth, you know, hey, it's the moon of the Aviv, and then you wait and start that month. And that gets us into, let's go into slide 5. He says in Exodus 34, "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread." I don't know, wait a second. I feel like this is the same one. Did you miss one of these? "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month Abib. For in the month Abib you came out of Egypt."
That was the 5th one you sent me.
I'm going to check here real quick. There was something specifically that I wanted to address in this. I'm going to check my other notes here. Huh.
I think it's great that neither of us prepped for this. That's a fantastic.
Well, I have my notes here, and so I thought I had another scripture. There is another scripture that says you shall observe the month of the Aviv. And so that to me is a command regarding the feast. We're to look, pay attention to, observe this specific month. So what I'm trying to unfold for you here is that I do believe that the Torah adequately and completely lays out a calendar that if you just simply use a common sense to look for, you can find it. It's right there. You can see the scriptures. I don't think that we need to go to all these other sources to try to figure out what the calendar is, because God gives the commands in the Torah. Surely he's going to give the way to keep the commands in the Torah. I mean, it says that David meditated on his Torah. That was his meditation the day and the night. So if he's spending all this time meditating on that, then there's a reason for it. You find the answers to all of life within the Torah. I don't think he didn't say he spent time meditating on Enoch or Jubilee or any of these other sources, and so I don't look to those for the guidelines regarding the calendar. I think that they have to be found within the Torah. I think that they're not laid out, and I think that Milo makes a good point about that. Like the system isn't laid out plainly, but it is laid out in there, and you can find it if you look for it. To go back to Genesis, I would contend that this calendar is very clearly laid out within those verses. It says that the sun and the moon were given for determining the appointed times. Well, both Milo and I believe that the day starts at sunset. And so we see there that the sun determines the new day. We differ, I think, here when we start getting into the month. I believe that the month is determined by the moon, and that's what I see in the Hebrew, that it's giving the moon cycles, and that's what, whenever I look at the concordances for these words, they all get back to the moon, and when you see of the month, it's, of the new moon, and so it always gets back to this, and I won't rabbit trail on the different types of calendars based on this system, because there's a myriad of those things, conjunction versus sliver.
Right.
But this calendar, I believe, is laid out in there. And like I said, because knowing when the month is crucial for knowing when the feast is, when it says that the appointed times are to be directed by the sun and the moon, it's by default directed by the moon, because that dictates what day of the month it is. Now, where does the barley come into this? Well, what causes the barley to grow? The sun causes the barley to grow. Depending on how much sunshine you have versus rain, that will determine when the barley becomes aviv. And God is in control of that. So he gets to determine every single year when the barley is aviv, and therefore when his calendar starts. Now, to contrast Milo's point of view on this, because he loves the Enoch calendar, where it lays out this beautiful, perfect, succinct mathematical system. I don't think that's real life. Real life is messy. Real life varies. You look at someone, a woman's monthly cycles, it changes from woman to woman. The length of the cycle changes from woman to woman. Then when a woman gets pregnant, the gestation changes from woman to woman. There is no, it's this day, and then once you conceive, it's exactly this many days till you get to the birth. Life is messy, life varies, life follows this natural ebb and flow. And you even see this referenced in the book of Job, where he tells him, do you know how long a deer is pregnant for? Tell me. There is no way to know these things. God is the one who dictates these things. And that's why I believe there's supposed to be a natural variation. And you even get this in the system that Milo is endorsing here, because he believes that the day starts at sunset. Well, sunset changes every single day. Every single day of the year, it's going to vary. You're going to get a minute longer, and then when the seasons change, it's going to get a minute shorter and a minute shorter. And so you have this natural ebb and flow. No day is exactly 24 hours long. It's just not. It's going to change every day. So from what I see, everything in life has this natural ebb and flow. And so it makes sense to me that this calendar would have that same natural ebb and flow. So I think that's pretty much my presentation here on what I believe. And so now we're going to go into kind of a back and forth on this.
Yes. So, okay. Your thesis, I took down a few notes. So I'm going to respond to a few bullet points from what you had to say. First was, you made the statement that you don't need a special understanding. I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you were saying correctly, that the Torah alone should be sufficient to constitute the calendar. That's, I think, the driving point. Like, you should be able to pick up the copy of the Torah 2,000 years later and extrapolate the data that you need to from the Torah alone. Is that kind of the point you're making?
To an extent, yes. Like I said, you still need to have some understanding of the language, of the culture. Sure. I mean, to even read it, you can't just pick up the Torah and expect to be able to read it. You have to have someone teach you how to read first. So there's this natural amount of, you have to get from external sources the understanding of in order to read the Torah. But yes, I do believe that the Torah alone is sufficient to teach this. And I think that the scriptures bear witness to this, that the Torah is perfect, and that it's how is it worded in the Psalms? I believe that it gives wisdom, converting the soul. It gives wisdom to
Right.
the simple.
Right.
And so, I mean, don't you want to? I would
mean
contend.
to downplay the significance or the.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would think that.
Yeah.
I think that that understanding the calendar is certainly wisdom, understanding that. And so if the Torah gives wisdom, then you should be able to attain that understanding from there.
Sure. I think that's a valid point, but here's what I would respond. And I don't mean to diminish the importance or the beauty or the magnitude of what the Torah. There was a beautiful analogy I heard the other day. The Torah is to science what a cookbook is to cookies, right? Like, maybe I said that wrong. Basically, the Torah is not a science book, right? The Torah is not a science book. The principles contained within it are going to be scientifically true, but it doesn't tell you molecular breakdown. It doesn't tell you this, that, and the other thing. I would say the same thing applies to the calendar. The Torah was not given in a cultural vacuum. It was given to a people group who had a cultural understanding at the time, and it was not given to 21st century Americans living, 30.
Let me stop you for a second. I want to make sure we don't get too far off of a rabbit trail here, because this is kind of getting into a next episode that we're going to be doing at some point of sola scriptura versus whatever nonsense you believe.
Right.
So let's focus directly.
We'll get into that.
Let's focus directly on what your rebuttal would be to these things, as closely connected to the calendar as possible.
Okay, so I'll strike that from the record. So you made a point, and the audio was lagging a little bit, so I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You said the appointed times need to be determined by the moon. I'm assuming you mean because of the full moon gives a clear visual indication. Am I correct?
No, because the scriptures say that in the 14th day of the month, or the 14th day of the moon, you shall keep the feast. And so in order for you to know the correct day of the feast, you have to know which day of the moon cycle it is. So the moon does determine the appointed times by extension. It doesn't specifically list months, but it does, because you have to know the month to know the. Go ahead.
I'm gonna scratch the rest of my notes and respond specifically to that, because that right there is the core of the issue.
Okay.
So the Zadokite calendar does not utilize all in the reckoning of anything.
Go back again.
The Zadokite calendar does not utilize. Okay. So the Enoch Zadokite calendar does not utilize lunar reckoning for anything in the calendar system.
Okay.
The reason being is because, for two reasons. One, the moon cycles will not give you 30-day months.
Right.
And if you look to both Genesis and Revelation, it seems clear to me, at least, that in God's reckoning of time, a month is 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
A lunar month is going to be either 28 or 29 days, depending. And so basing anything on 28 or 29-day months, in my opinion, is not scriptural. That being said, there were a number of times that you used the word moon and month interchangeably.
Correct.
There is an actual Hebrew word for moon that is not used in any passage relating to the tracking of time. Every time the word month is used in the scripture, and most of the time when the word new moon is translated in scripture, the word is chodesh, which is the same from that we get the term chadash or Brit Chadash, New Testament, New Covenant. It literally refers to renewal. And here's something interesting. Is actually only used once in the scriptures, and that's in, and it's not even the new month, new renewed, new Hodesh, and that's in reference to the month of Abib. So I actually agree with you that Abib has to be in the springtime, and the Abib is referencing a very specific event with the barley. But I don't think that that's determined by a moon. I think that's determined by a season, and that would be the season of spring. And that's why, to me, the Zadokite calendar takes the cake, I guess you could say, because it does utilize 30-day months, the unleavened cake. Let me clarify, because we're going into Passover. Do you know how much of a pain it is to have your birthday during Passover almost every year? I have to say, my wife makes these fantastic lemon. They're like no-bake lemon things. They're really good. Anyway,
Well,
not to rabbit trail, but so for me, the whole concept of a month being utilized in the tracking of time, equating to the moon, I
you
the
don't see it.
I don't see it. What I
Okay.
do see, this is what I do see, and I'll wrap up my conclusion with this. The Hebrew calendar that's in use today, whether you want to talk about the Hillel 2, or the Karaite, or the sliver, or the conjunction, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
is literally a 100% reproduction of the Babylonian calendar system. Literally 100% the same thing, down to the names of the months. What you see is you see the Babylonian names of the months like Tevet,
Oh yeah,
Shivat, so on and so forth.
yeah.
You see those actually used in
Hmm.
the scriptures,
But that was from the Babylonian captivity. Oh, yeah, but that was after the captivity.
right? Absolutely. The entire concept, this is my thesis, the entire concept of using the moon to determine a month is from
Mhm.
Babylonian captivity.
Well, okay.
Down to
So,
the fact that so
go ahead.
here's one last thing.
Okay.
And then I'm going to be done with my spiel. So down to even the concept of using the moon to determine when you have to add a 13th month, right?
Yep.
Like you don't ever have to have a 13th month on the Zadokite calendar.
Hmm.
And I would challenge anyone who believes in the 13th month to find it in the scriptures. Now, I'm not sola scriptura, so I don't have to play by those rules. But for people who are sola scriptura, where's your 13th month, right? Like, where's the rule that says that you would ever add a 13th month? I can tell you where the rule is, and it's from Babylon, because their calendar systems are the exact same thing.
Yeah.
They
So that
even they even actually observed Sabbaths by the lunar. Like, you want to talk about where the idea of the lunar Sabbath came from? It's literally straight from Babylon.
I don't know if I believe that. I think lunar Sabbath is much more modern, but let's not rabbit trail.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to address a few things as
Okay.
far as my rebuttal of your beliefs here. So
Okay.
first off, I want to address this thing that you said because you actually just made an argument for me without realizing it, and now I'm going to take you to task on it. So you just said that the Zadokite calendar does not use the moon for any calculation. But Genesis 1 says that the moon is to be used to determine the appointed times. So that right there, slam dunk, destroys your whole calendar because you do not use the moon for any part of your calendar.
Can I answer that just real quick before you go on?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the moon in the Zadokite calendar system, when I say it doesn't use the month, I mean that it doesn't use the moon. I mean that it does not use the moon in the determining of months. It uses the moon in
But
determining of days.
how do you determine days with the month when the sunset determines the days?
You would track your days based on the lesser light to rule the night and the greater light to rule the day.
That doesn't make any sense. The moon isn't used to determine the length of the day or the night. Not in that calendar system.
The moon there would be synonymous for nighttime. Like it's the understanding that the moon governs the night and the sun governs the day.
All right, let's save this debate a little bit for the end. We want to kind of close out with a few questions back and forth, and
Sure.
so we'll try to save that. I feel like this is a slam dunk without me having to say anything else to refute this Enoch calendar. The fact that it doesn't use the moon is a violation of what God clearly ordained the moon to be used for. Having said that, I want to move on to a few other arguments. So he points out about the 30-day cycle and how it lines up with the months given in when the ark was floating, that it numbers this 150 days and it's 5 months, and I agree with that, and it's something that I don't have an answer to. I've heard speculation about things like the length of the moon or the lunar cycle having changed as a result of the flood. So prior to the flood, the moon cycles actually were 30 days long. The same thing, that the year being 364 days instead of 365 and a quarter. I've heard all kinds of speculation about this, and I think it's very plausible. The other explanation that I have to address that is Noah was doing this, and he didn't have access to see the moon while being on the ark, and so they used just a predetermined, this is about how long the month is, and that's a possible explanation too. Not as good. I do think that there's possibly some validity to the length of the month changing as we've gone through time, but I don't feel like that can really make a case against the using of the moon to determine the month. And then even going forward to Revelation, where it's giving this example, changing it to almost like rounding up, I don't see as a violation of the general idea of this is a month and their moon cycles. I just don't see that violation. It's rounding them up. It's giving a basic number to these prophecies. And maybe I'm not explaining this well, but I don't see a conflict between the two calendars by allowing these prophecies to take place and saying that the month is still determined by the moon cycle. Another point that I would like to point out is to what Milo was saying about the months being named after the Babylonian gods. I see that as kind of a point in the core of the lunar cycle, because you wouldn't rename the months, the moon cycles, after them and change that and then still have those lunar cycles referring to the feast months if they weren't compatible with each other. It would be a whole new reckoning of time. And so it seems like something would come off there. Let's see. I'm going to open up his slides. I want to look through here real quick. There was a couple other things that you wrote. I'm going to jump in here. Sorry, I'm just looking at your slides real quick.
Yeah, you're good.
I take huge issue. He was talking about the vernal equinox here. I don't see the idea of the vernal equinox anywhere, the solstice, anywhere in Scripture. That I see is something completely in the kingdom of Babylon, in that pagan system. I just don't see it anywhere in the Scriptures. I don't see it anywhere in the Torah. I don't see the concept being addressed anywhere. And so to use that as a reckoning of time, I feel like you have to completely come up with something extra biblical that has no place there, and it's only found in the pagan cultures. I'll open up slide 5 here. Is that the one I just looked at? Trying to remember. There was another argument I wanted to rebut on this, refute on it, but I'm not seeing it. So I guess that's the end of my rebuttal, and we can kind of go back and forth into a few questions. We kind of want to take each other to task on a few things and see where each stands on stuff. So if I may go first, the question that I have for you is, how do you fit a 364-day calendar into a 365 and a quarter day solar cycle?
So that's probably the one. I'm not going to call it a flaw in the argument or a flaw in the calendar, but that's the one thing that has the most debate amongst people who advocate for this calendar system. Mm-hmm. The best solution that's been put forth, unfortunately, the Dead Sea Scrolls don't really contain an answer, but the best data that we can extrapolate from them is to add what we would call a leap week, an additional 7 days where necessary. Okay. So whenever your year ends prior to the equinox, you would add a leap week, basically. Okay. And if you do this, you can do this on either in 5 or 6 year patterns, 5 or 6 year cycles, or you can add 1 or 2 every 7th year, depending, and it'll stay on track with the 365.
Okay. All right. So you said that you also have the feast days falling on a Wednesday each time, but you also said that there was an intercalculatory day on the first, third, 7th, and whatever month, where there was an extra day added. Is that correct?
So what that so what that is that's to keep the seasons and cycles of 7. All right. The month patterns go 30, 30, 31. That's 91 days. That's 13 weeks.
So it's not actually a 30-day month. There's one month that's 31.
Enoch explains this all very clearly. Enoch
So
72.
the reason I was bringing that up is because it seems like by my count that by time you got to the fall feast, those would be jumping forward or backwards 2 days because you have these extra days being added.
You'd cut out just a little bit.
So by time you got to the fall feast, your calendar would have those extra 2 days, and that would bump your feast back 2 days by time you got to the fall feasts.
No, it actually keeps it on track with the equinox.
Okay.
It means that the first day of the 7th month will be pretty darn close to the fall equinox, probably within a day or two.
So
and it means that your appointed times will be on the 15th of the month.
Okay. So basically you need 182 days to keep a 7-day cycle. If you had 180 days, it would be a 7-day cycle minus 2.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Just wanted that
Yes.
clarification. So do you have any things that you would like to question towards me on my calendar that aren't making sense to you, that you feel like you need to be addressed?
Not, I'm just going to be brutally honest. I feel as if your explanation for the 30-day months, in Genesis, maybe I can buy that. That's pure speculation.
Mm-hmm.
But in Revelation, I just have 2 words for you, and that's weak sauce. I mean...
And I don't disagree with that.
I just...
The problem, though, is that it actually isn't answered in your solution because you have 30 days and then 31 days. So by the time you get through a year, you still have an extra 4 days and actually 5 days that aren't accounted for in your calendar. So you actually have the exact same problem that I do, just on a lesser scale.
I would suggest I do not have that problem because I have the Book of Enoch, which very explicitly states that you have 4 intercalary days,
right,
which are not included in the reckoning of
what
the year.
you're still run into is that in order for you to have your 1,260 days, that's actually not going to end you from the first of the month to the first of the month. That is going to bump you back. By the time you get to the end of that, let's just come up with a number, 10 days that you're going to have jumped back into that last month because of all your intercalculatory days that extend out your months. Because you do have 4 months out of the year that are essentially 31 days. Maybe not because they're still counted as a month and then a day, but when you add a full year, you have 364, not 360. And so when you go through
so you're saying that
42
John
months...
should have... Sorry.
Go ahead.
You're saying that John in Revelation should have said, instead of 1,260, it should have been 1,200, I'm really just ballparking, at 72, because it should have counted the extra 4 days.
Exactly.
So the reason... So I understand what you're saying. I feel like that's addressed in the Book of Enoch, where it explicitly says these 4 extra days are not counted in the reckoning of the year. So it's not a false statement to say that the year is 360 days, because those additional 4 days, you don't actually count in the reckoning of time. Like, that's explicitly stated as part of the calendar.
You don't have them counted in the reckoning of the month, but you still have them in the reckoning of a year and in the reckoning of time. I mean, you don't just have a day disappear. I mean, I think this is a huge problem if we're going to be intellectually honest here. You can't get to the end of your 42 months without having these extra, let's say, 12 days.
Right. But I would say that anyone who's familiar with this calendar system, and you told them that there was 42 months and this was the number of days, they would know instinctively that there's days that you didn't count in that counting of time.
Man, I
would suggest the apostles were rather familiar with this calendar system as...
So let's address
but that's a conversation for another day.
Let's address the white elephant, this moon in the room, to our earlier question. How do you reconcile with Genesis 1:14 that says the moon is to be used in the appointed times?
Well, I would say that the moon governs the night and the sun governs the day.
It governs it, but it doesn't say to let them govern the feasts. It says to let them be used to determine.
I think that's semantics. I think it makes sense.
You are so full of crap.
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, if the moon governs the night,
well,
the sun governs the day.
Then we have to say that the sun is for semantics too, and we should actually be starting the day at noon or midnight.
No, you just look for light and darkness. I think you're overthinking this. You look for light and darkness, patterns of light and darkness.
But it doesn't use it to start the appointed times.
Why would it need to?
Because it says that. Let them be used for the appointed times.
Yeah. And it determines light and darkness, right? Like the moon rules over the night.
Honestly, I think this question wins. I think this question wins the debate.
I don't. It's a valid question. I feel like you're overthinking it, but I think maybe you might have a valid question there. But I feel like your calendar system, A, came directly from Babylon, and we have literature to prove that, and B, doesn't address 30-day months. So
Yeah.
I feel like right there.
Well, I don't think that history shows that the calendar came from Babylon. I think it shows that the naming of the months came from Babylon.
Well, the Babylonian calendar is literally the same one that's observed by every Torah keeper in use today.
Right.
Literally the same.
So
down to the addition of the 13th month.
But doesn't that fall true for other things? I mean, the people in Babylon are going to have children the same way that the people in Israel have children. Just because a system is the same doesn't mean it's bad. It actually would lend validity to the biblical system, because if Babylon understands that a month is based on the lunar cycle, it just makes sense that these cultures would all be doing the same thing. They would be basing a month off of the lunar cycle. I mean, you even have the semantics of that word being moon month. It's the same word.
Except in Hebrew, it's completely not.
Well,
that's a side.
Yeah, maybe so. But
that's a side.
There's a reason that our language evolved. That is what I'm saying. I think.
Well, yeah, because our language evolved from Babylon, of course.
Well, I don't know that I'd argue that. I mean, you have, and this is a point that I've made many times in the past on my Facebook post, that in English we say when we're going to finish something, it's the rest of it. And why do we say that? That's an allusion to the Sabbath. The end of the week is the Sabbath. The end of anything is called the rest. I'm going to have the rest of the pie. I'm going to do the rest of that work. You get to the rest. And so our language does have many Hebraic concepts embedded in them.
I get that, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think my point with Babylon is that you see that the Babylonian calendar system is literally the same as what's in use today, where you reckon things by the month. You add a lunar, like a 13th month when you need to keep up with the agricultural year.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But then, so in the first, if this was consistently the calendar system in use, and there was no other ancient system ever in use, I wouldn't even question it at this point, because I would assume this is true. But that's not what we see. We see in the first century a very distinct Jewish sect, which was sickened with how things were going in Jerusalem, and keeping what they believed to be true to God's principles. And they rejected this Babylonian calendar system and used one that didn't incorporate the moon.
And my response to that would be that today you have these groups that reject something completely because they think that it's got pagan roots to it, when it actually doesn't. Just because there is a group of people that reject something saying that it's pagan doesn't mean that it's true. But I wanted to address real quick the idea of the 13th months, because I see this brought up a lot. Everyone says, well, where's the 13th month in scriptures? There doesn't need to be a 13th month in scriptures, because the 13th month, the 8th month, the 12th month have no bearing in anything scriptural. They're completely useless. All it is just a measuring of time for our own daily life. The only time that it's important is to know when to start the new year, the Abib, and when we get to the 7th month, because both of those are regarding the feasts. Other than that, the number of the month means absolutely nothing. And so to add a 13th, 14th, 20th month in a year doesn't matter. You just keep going with the months until you get to the Abib barley. And so that's my response to people that say that you need to have this 13th month. No, you don't. You don't need to have any of the other months. The only months you need to know are the 1st and the 7th month. That's the only ones that matter biblically.
See, I feel like your answer is not true to Sola Scriptura. I'll just be honest about that. I feel like
we don't want to get into Sola Scriptura.
it's part of it. I don't really want to get into it either, because I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I think we got to wrap this up. We're at just about the hour mark. I don't know if you want to give maybe a sentence or two just to kind of summarize your calendar, and then I'll give a sentence or two, and we'll wrap this up so we're not making another 3-hour show.
So this would be my summary, is that God is not a God of disorder, but a God of order. And the Zadokat calendar is literally the most ordered calendar system that you'll ever find.
All right.
And but again, I would say don't keep it if your community is not keeping it.
Okay, so I'll make my sentence. It's going to be the exact same thing, only the opposite. God is a God of beautiful order, but the order that we see in nature is variation. And so because we see the variation in his order, his calendar would follow that same thing. And look at the scriptures I showed you. You can find the calendar laid out beautifully. And that's what the Jews, the Karaites, they all use this to determine the calendar and when it starts. And so let's wrap it up there. I think this was a really good show. I'm pretty sure I won.
It was good.
I'm gonna put this thing up here. Where is it? There we go. Milo is wrong. I've been saving this. And that just
it hasn't come up already.
That summarizes the whole show right there.
I've been keeping track of who's been winning these debates, and I think as long as Gary is not in on this one, I'm going to call this one a tie.
Gary is going to come in this one. He's going to tell you how wrong you are, and he's going to determine me the winner. And I think we need to just go with that.
Gary, my arch nemesis. I'm kidding. I actually really like Gary, but you know,
it's horrible when you and Gary team up because that is just like nuclear. It is my worst nightmare.
Yeah. Oh, we got to team up more often.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's pretty rare.
It is rare, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So let's end this here. I don't remember if we ended with a tagline or anything. I'm going to end with a tagline that I'm right, Milo is wrong, and
oh my gosh. And I'm gonna end with a tagline that we need to get out of Babylon.
Yes, and I agree with that. Moose approves.
Yeah. There we go.
Have a good night, everyone.
We'll see you all later. Hope you enjoyed.